The carriage of carbon dioxide around the body is actually done so by hydrogen carbonate ions, HCO3-, and roughly around 85% of your actual carbon dioxide that you exhale is transported around in this form. So we're going to just quickly look at how this is done in the red blood cells. So here on the left hand side I've actually got my muscle cells, and they're obviously going to be producing CO2 as they respire. So this CO2 is going to diffuse into the red blood cells, where it's going to combine with water, and that water and carbon dioxide produces carbonic acid, or H2CO3-. And that carbonic acid is formed with the help of an enzyme called carbonic anhydrase. Now this enzyme has come up in previous exam papers, so it's definitely going to be something worth remembering. Now obviously as a protein, which red blood cells are made of, it's not good to have an acid, because we know that changes in pH can alter the protein structure. And so what happens is this carbonic acid dissociates into hydrogen ions and hydrogen carbonate ions. So these hydrogen carbonate ions here actually diffuse out of the red blood cell and into the plasma. Now as you can see, we've got a negative ion leaving the red blood cell. So we've got a shift, we've got a change in negativity. And so what actually happens is we have a chloride shift to counteract that and ensure that the charge within the red blood cell is maintained. So the whole purpose of our red blood cells is to actually carry oxygen around the body. So once this carbon dioxide has been diffused into the red blood cell, this respiring cell obviously needs oxygen. So what's going to happen is the oxyhemoglobin dissociates under this influence of hydrogen ions. So this has a huge impact to help dissociate that oxygen from that hemoglobin molecule. So we're just going to be left with hemoglobin and this oxygen. And this oxygen is therefore going to be taken up by the respiring cells by diffusion and then used for respiration. That leaves us with our hemoglobin molecule and this hydrogen ion, and they actually come together to form hemoglobinic acid. And because this hemoglobin molecule has taken up a hydrogen ion, we say that it is acting as a buffer, and that is really important. So a buffer is just a compound that helps to maintain a constant pH, and as I've said before, this is all due to ensure that that protein structure of the hemoglobin is maintained. So what we're going to look at now is something called the Bohr effect. And what that's got to do with is changes in carbon dioxide concentration. So if we just quickly think about what that means, every time we respire, we produce carbon dioxide. And if we think about what that produces in the red blood cell is carbonic acid. And that's going to dissociate into hydrogen and hydrogen carbonate ions. So this hydrogen here actually is going to eventually combine with that hemoglobin molecule, which did have oxygen bound to it. So this is going to dissociate, so we're left with hemoglobin and hydrogen, and those two come together to form hemoglobinic acid. So in reality, what's happening is as we produce carbon dioxide, we're going to be producing more hydrogen, and that hydrogen molecule is going to be essentially forcing its way to be bound with that hemoglobin molecule. So the oxygen's going to be forced out, if you will. So what we're going to look at now is what that looks like in a graph formation. And if you remember before, we have our normal sigmoid curve or S-shaped curve, and you're always going to have carbon dioxide within the blood. So let's say we've got a resting partial pressure of carbon dioxide of 3 kilopascals. So as we start to exercise or jog, we actually get a shift of that sigmoid curve to the right. So we're increasing the partial pressure of carbon dioxide because we're now respiring. So we're actually going to be producing more carbon dioxide, therefore more hydrogen ions, which means that more oxygen needs to be kicked out. So just going back to our curve, if we have a partial pressure of now say 5 kilopascals, we've got an increased carbon dioxide concentration, so more oxygen is actually being released. So when more carbon dioxide is present, hemoglobin is less saturated with oxygen. Okay, let's ramp up the exercise and maybe start sprinting. So if we've now got a partial pressure of CO2 of maybe 10 kilopascals, that curve is again going to move to the right because that carbon dioxide causes the hemoglobin to be less saturated with oxygen. This makes the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve shift downwards and to the right, and we call that the Bohr shift, and this is what we call the Bohr effect, this whole idea that oxygen is dissociating from the hemoglobin molecule because of this increased carbon dioxide concentration. So because we've got an increased carbon dioxide concentration, it's telling our red blood cells, look, we've got respiring cells going on, it needs oxygen. So this is exactly what respiring cells need, and so in order to maintain aerobic respiration, when we've got an increased level of carbon dioxide concentration within the blood, it's really important that the red blood cells release that oxygen and dissociate that oxygen to the respiring cells.